All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Yud. We finished our class yesterday quoting the opinion of Reish Lakish that the reason why the Shekhinah was not fully manifest, certainly not the way it was manifest and revealed during the times of the first Beis HaMikdash. Why did that not happen during the times of the second Beis HaMikdash? Was because the Jewish people failed to immigrate on the mass when Ezra rebuilt the second Beis HaMikdash. And today we will start on Daf Tes Amud Beis, quoting the opinion of Reish Lakish, of Rabbi Yechanan, who gives a complete different reason. And that's going to lead us into the discussion that the Persians are descendants of Yefes. The Gemara is from that going to go on and clarify who are the nations and where do they live. We're going to quote the pasuk that we have in Parshas Noach regarding all of the children of Yefes. And that's going to lead us into the debate about a futuristic event, and God willing, an imminent futuristic event, that right before the coming of Mashiach, we have a machlokes in the Gemara whether Rome is going to fall in the hand of Persia or whether Persia is going to fall in the hand of Rome. Very interesting. Which president is going to win? And then we're going to come back to the topic of Yoma. We're going to be speaking about the question whether there was a mezuzah on Lishkas Parhedrin. So we're going to learn some halachas regarding mezuzah. We're going to be learning about whether a sukkah is obligated to have a mezuzah. We're going to be learning whether, there's a law by Maisres that when is produce obligated to be tithed biblically on the level that once it reached a certain phase, you may not even snack from it before separating Trumas or Maisres. So the product has to be fully finished. And that will include that produce that is meant to enter one's home. It has to have what we call Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, that if you bring it into the house and it sees, so to say, the face of the house, now the obligation is so strong that you can't even snack from it before you tithe it. If someone brings produce into a sukkah, is that called, it has Re'iyas Pnei Habayis? Or do we say, no, the sukkah is not considered a real bias, and that's very much linked into the machlokes, into the question whether a sukkah is obligated to have a mezuzah on it or not, and therefore that is going to lead us into quoting the beginning of Masechta Sukkah, right? Can a sukkah be above 20 amos or not? That's a machlokes tanoim, and really that depends on whether a sukkah has to be a diras keva. Does it have to be halachically a permanent dwelling place? Of course, we only live in it for 7 days or 8 days, but does it have to be in the category of a diras keva, which will be the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, which is why he allows a sukkah to be even higher than 20 amos, like a home can be higher than 20 amos, or must the dafka be a diras arai? Must it be considered a temporary dwelling place, which is why it won't be allowed to be taller than 20 amos, and that's going to be linked into the topic whether it's obligated in a mezuzah or not, and much more. Let us start on Daf Tes Amud Beis. We left off 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Again, we have that story. We had a question mark as to who were the characters of the story, but let's go with the original version, that it was Reish Lakish that made a statement that the reason why there was no manifestation of the Shekhinah Bisman Bayesheni, because the Yidden did not, the majority of the Jews did not immigrate to the Holy Land when we build the second Beis HaMikdash. However, says the Gemara, that Kiyosei lekami de Rabbi Yechanan, when Reish Lakish came in front of Rabbi Yechanan, and he repeated that which he said, so Amar Lei says, Rabbi Yechanan to Reish Lakish, no, lav hainu taima, I disagree with you. And he spoke it out clearly, that I nami siliku kulu b'mei Ezra, even if all of the Jewish people would have gone up to the Holy Land during the times of Ezra, still, the Shekhinah was not destined to be manifest in the second Beis HaMikdash on the level of Zman Bayis Rishon. And why is that? This is fascinating. Because as it says, and we're going here to a pasuk in Parshas Noach, that right after Noach sobered up and he became aware of that which happened to him in a state of drunkenness. So Noach says, Yaft Elikim liyefes. May Hashem grant beauty to Yefes. However, v'yishkoin, but where will God dwell? in the tense, plural, be ahale shame, in the tense of shame. What does that mean? Daf Yud, that afal gav diyaft elikim liyefes. God indeed granted beauty to Yefes. It's not what people think it means. Look inside the top Rashi. What was the beauty granted to Yefes? So we are beginning from a premise that will be authenticated, that Persia, that Paras are descendants of Yefes. Amazing. The Europeans will see clearly the Germans are descendants of Yefes, right? And so are the Persians, amongst many others, as we'll see in a moment. And the beauty, the meaning that God granted them with beauty means that God gave them the merit to build the second Beis HaMikdash. Look inside the top Rashi. The beauty is shezochu parsiyim libnes bayesheni. So God granted them with that beauty. But nevertheless, vayishkoin, only be ahale shem. But where will the Shechina be manifest? Only in the tense, in plural, of shame. Who are the tense of shame? Even before Mashiach, the plural, Mishkan Shiloi, that was built by the descendants of Shem. It was built by the Jewish people. It was taken the Chelek of Yosef, but it was built by Semites. And same thing with the first Beis HaMikdash, Shlomo HaMelech. However, Eina Shechina Shoyra Ela Bi Ahale Shem. So now, even though that Persia is not where it's not Europe, people don't look similar. The Gemara is going to have to prove that the Parsoim indeed come from Yefes. Says the Gemara, Parsoim in all of the Yefes Ka'asu. And we're going back here again to a pasuk in Parshas Noach, because as it says, this is regarding all of the nations that are recorded in the Torah, the 70 nations, that who are Bnei Yefes, Goimer, Umagoig, Umadai, V'Yavon, V'Suval, Umeshach, V'Siras, and a verse, and we're going to go one by one, translating who are these nations. And Chevra, these are these Gemaras that you can spend a whole year on it. Because just to appreciate how many great commentators translate every nation to be someone else that geographically live in another region. It's a very important Gemara over here. But we're going to have to run through it, and we're going to quote one of the many opinions. So Goimer, the first Bnei Yefes, the oldest one is, look inside the Gemara here, Germamia. Look inside the Hagos, look inside the Gra, Hagos Hagra. No, Germania, clear. There's no debate about that. So Goimer are the Germans, Bnei Yefes. Next, Magoig. Now we understand the importance of knowing who Magog is, because the Milchama of Goig and Magog, that's the Magog. So who's Magog? Who's the nation of Magog? Kandia. Now, what's Kandia? So we have, just to bring a few ashitas. Some say that Magog Kandia under Mongols. Stel zich vor, Bnei Yefes, the second child. The second opinion is that Kandia is a region that's in the southern eastern tip of Russia. And there's also a tradition that Umitzafan Tipas Achara, and the final war that will lead into the nations attempting to hurt the Jewish people is going to begin with the war of Russia and Ukraine. This is those who follow that Magog, that Kandia is in the region of Russia. Just to know that Kandia, there's one of the main Greek islands called Crete. That's another shita of Shkoich with the pictures of who the Kandians are. Let's move on. Now, even moving on in the Gemara, there's different versions in the Gemara, reminiscent of Talmud Yerushalmi. So we're going to learn the Hagos Habach. By me, it's all the way in the bottom of the Gemara. So his version is Madai Kimashma'oi, because Madai, even today in English, Meria, that's a Hastom Madai. And Yavan, I'm reading the Girsa from the Bach, and Yavan is Makondia, Macedonia. At least it's very similar, the words in English to the words in Aramaic. And let's go back into the Gemara. Tuval, the next child, who is Tuval and where do they live? Zem Beis Unaiki. The Abarbanel says that Unaiki is in the Iberian Peninsula, and they were the first Spaniards. Interesting. Also from Bnei Yefes. Meshech, what's Meshech? That's Musia. Actually, there's a country now, there's a region now in Turkey called Misya or Musia, the same word. Tiras is the final name mentioned in the pasuk. Here says the Gemara, we have a machlokes between Rabbi Simai and the Rabbanon. Others say that the machlokes is in between Rabbi Simai and the Rabbanon. And what are the two opinions over here? Chad Amar, that Tiras refers to base Tiraiki, Thrace. Thrace is a region that's mamish in between Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. Chad Amar, here's where we're coming back to our sugya, that Tiras, which is the son of Yefes, is Paras, which is in modern day Iran. Tanach Rabbi Yosef, Tiras zu Paras. So here we go. So yes, so that's the taich that Rabbi Yechanan says, that the beauty that God gave to Yefes is not that the beautiful people, it's that they had the merit to build the second temple. And what Noach told his three sons is that even though Yefes will have the merit of making the beautiful home, but Vayish, that God, Shechina, will only be Ahalei Shem. Mishkan Shiloi, Bayis Rishon, and God willing, the imminent and the third and final eternal Beis HaMikdash. Now that we identified the sons of Yefes, over there in Parshas Noach, we also speak about the descendants of Cham. Now Cham's eldest son was Cush. And then the pasuk gives the names of the sons of Cush, the Eneklach of Cham. And who are they? So we're quoting Safta. These are words in the Chumash. Verama v'Saftacha. Who are they? So Tanach Rabbi Yosef. And Rabbi Yosef is not referring to Rama. Rabbi Yosef is only referring to Safta. And Saftacha, which sound very similar, which indeed they are. So he says that there is a region called Sakistan. Not Pakistan, but Sakistan. Now you have what the Gemara calls the inner Sakistan and the outer Sakistan. Though who lives in the region, exactly, Safta moved to one place and Saftacha moved to the other one. That Sakistan, Gaviyasa, the inner Sakistan, and the Saftacha is the Sakistan Barayasa. And says the Gemara that between one and the other, it's Meya Parsa. And if you look at the circumference of the outer Sakistan, it's 1,000 parsa. It's a huge region geographically. Now we're going to what the pasuk speaks about in the beginning of the reign of Nimrod. Don't forget that Nimrod was a descendant of Cham. But the Hiresh is Mamlachtoi, that the beginning of the rulership of Nimrod was in Bavel and in Erech and in Akkad and in Kalnei. So Nachamal, this is the Sugi and Shas where we're going to identify geographically we are these regions. So when the pasuk says Bavel, says yeah, Babylonia. Erech refers to Oirichois. Oirichois, some translate to be referred to the city of Uruk, which is a city on the lower Euphrates River. Akkad is Bashkar. I think that's the name even today. And you should know that many say that Nitzivim is where Yehuda ben Beseda lived, right? Remember in the beginning of Psachim that he did not make Aliyah Salegel because he lived Chutz La'aretz? That's where he lived. That's Bashkar. Kalnei Zenoifer Ninfi. It's a city called Nippur today. And then it says, Ashur, that from that land Ashur left. Now, Chavra, understand that Ashur is a son of Shem. And the moment Ashur saw that Nimrod is beginning a rebellion, that in its core it was some sort of rebellion against God Almighty, he removed himself from the whole Chavra of Nimrod. So we learned in a Braisa that not only is Ashur the name of the son of Shem, but he had settled in the city. Ashur is Silak. And where did Ashur go? And which cities did he build up? So the pasuk says that Ashur built Nineveh, and many say that what's the story that we have many years later? Melech Nineveh. No, people say it was the Paroi, but when Nineveh and with its king heard that God is reprimanding them, and they're going to be punished if they won't do tshuva, they immediately did tshuva. Right? That's the whole story that we read at the end of Yom Kippur. After Yoina, why were they zoicha to be so obedient to God? Because it was founded by a person, by Ashur, who dafke went away from a rebellion against God. So the foundation of Nineveh was trying to be connected to God, which inspired somehow and empowered their descendants and their inhabitants to do tshuva. So he built Nineveh and the city called Rechoy Vasir, the Es Kalach, and Says the Gemara again, what's Ninveh Kimashmoy? You know what's called today? It's called Mosul. We know Mosul is Ninveh. Rechoiv Oisir refers to the region called Pras de Meshan. And Kalach or Kalach is Pras, is the region of Bursif, of it's called in English, Barsipa. Gavaldik. Then it says Ve'es Resen, and the city of Resen is Bein Ninveh, is between Ninveh and Bein Kalach. And she, now is she referring to Resen, or is she referring to Ninveh, or is she referring to Kelach? The Gemara will clarify that she is a big city. So let's go. Resen, says the Gemara, Ze Aktispoin. Aktispoin, so there's a city that's called Setesifan, that is around 35 kilometers of Baghdad. It's at the banks of the Tigris. That's what the name of the city is. And when it says in the pasuk that she's a large city, so says the Gemara, I don't know if that's referring to Ninveh, which is the big city, or for Resen, this Aktisfoin is the Ir HaGedolah. However, it's being that it says in Yoma, it says V'Ninveh Hoisa Ir Gedolah Lalikim Mahalach Shleishus Yamim, which was then considered a huge city. So you have a omer that will clarify, that will be Megale, that here in Chumash, Ninveh is the one that the Torah is saying she is the big city. Okay, now that we spoke about the descendants of Yefes and where they lived, so now we're jumping Me'inyan Le'inyan, we're going to Parsha Shalach. That in Parsha Shalach it says that when Kalev went to be Mishtatech al Kivrei Yavis, so because he was the only one that went to Hebron, he saw those who live in Hebron. And the pasuk says, V'sham over there, guys, the last narrow line, in Hebron lived Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. These are names of three brothers that were Yelidei Ho'anak. They were the offsprings of the giant. We have a tradition that the name of their father, the name of the giant was Arba. Right? One of the reasons why it's called Kiryas Arba, aside of the ones that we learned in Chumash Rashi. And we learned in a Braisa that from the three brothers, they were all descendants of giants, which means they were giants. Which one was the strongest one? That the first one mentioned, Achiman, comes actually from the word Ach Yemin, which means Miyuman Sheba'ach, and he was the right hand of the brothers. Just like Begashmi, as most people, their right hand is stronger than the left hand. He was the biggest gibber. Sheshai, the weaker one. Why was he called Sheshai? Sheshai comes from the words Se'es or She'es, to ravage, which means Shemeisem Esoaretz Kishechisois, that when he walked, he ruined the earth underneath him. That's how powerful he was. And Talmai is similar. That's the third brother. Shemeisem Esoaretz Talomim. Talmai Miloshan furrows. Davar Acher is not a machloikas, but furthermore, and this is why the furthermore is why we are quoting it here in Yoma Daf Yud, that what city did Achiman build up? Achiman built the city of Anos. The first widest line, Sheshai built the city of Alush, and Talmai built a city called Talbush. So the Gemara here is telling us which character, which person founded which city, and it's important to know who founded something, because the founder of a city will, as we just mentioned from the story of Ninveh, will have an influence on that people and in that region, Pashut, until the end of days. And then the pasuk continues that they were Yelidei Ha'anak. Literally, it means they were the descendants, they were the offsprings of the giant. But the word Anak, my friends, means a necklace. And when it says Yelidei Ha'anak, the drush is that Shema'anik and Achama b'koimasan, that they made the son look like a necklace because of their height. In other words, they were so tall that when you looked up, you didn't see, is the sun taller or are they taller? It almost looked like the sun was underneath them. So therefore, it almost looked like the sun was as a necklace that they were wearing. Omar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, in the name of Rabbi, I want you to know, now that we mentioned about Paras, Taka, God bless them, that they'll be beautiful, which means that they are going to build a second bias. But at the end of days, that Rome is destined to fall in the hands of Persia. Right before Mashiach is coming, one nation will overpower the other. So listen to this, Oy Gewalt. The Persians are going to win. As it says, and therefore, listen to the eights of God, Ashiyats, regarding Al Edom, or the El Edom, against Edom, in God's thoughts that he has what to do. Al or El Yoshri Teman. Yoshvei Teman, my friends, are the grandchildren of Esav. That you should know. Will it not happen, which means it will happen, that the young tzoin will drag them off? If the young flock will make their dwellings destitute. And who are the young tzoin? The young tzoin refers to the young. Who's the young? Paras, the Persians. And they will, right before the coming of Mashiach, they will devastate and they will drag away the Edom, the Romans, the Western culture, the Western world. Maskiv, Lord Abba Barhula, my mashma, how do you know that the Tzidei Yatzain goes to Paras? So he answered, because since it says in Enoch HaPosik, that that the vision that you had regarding the horned ram are Malchei Madai Uparas, they are referring to the leaders of Madai Uparas, so that we call them Ha'ayil. Oh, so Tzidei Yatzain refers to them. If that's the source, we have a kasha. So, well, hold on. What the Persians are not the only nation that are alluded to as flocks, as tzoin. No, maybe it refers to Yavan. Maybe the Greeks, right before the coming of Mashiach, right? Rome will fall in the hands of the Greeks. As it says that the Hatzafir Hasoir and the male goat is Melech Yavan, and they had no answer. They didn't understand how taka do you know that the pasuk Tzidei Yatzain is referring to Paras. However, Kisalik Rab Chaviva Bar Sur Marke, when he went up to the Holy Land, and Amra Kameda Hurabanam, and Amar Lei Mandala, and he told them that the Chevron and Babel don't understand what the Raya is. How do you know that Tzidei Yatzain refers to Paras? So Amar Lei is to which they told Rab Chaviva that the one in Babel who challenged you by saying maybe it refers to the pasuk of Hatzafir Hasoir didn't understand how to learn Chumash or how to learn Nach. Whoever asked doesn't understand how to teach a pasuk. So only such a person, Moisef to Yufta Rebbe, because it was Rebbe that was the one that brought from the Yirmiyah the Raya that the Tzidei Yatzain. Based on that, the Rebbe was the one that said that in the future Rome is destined to fall in the hands of the Persians. So because my Tzidei Yatzain, what does the word Tzidei mean? The youngsters. What did we quote? We quoted on this Amud on the top, on the Plato says Bnei Yefes. So it was Goymer and Magog and Madai and Yavin and Tuval and Meshach and Tiras, and the last one quoted is Tiras. He's quoted last because he was the youngest. And as we mentioned above, who is Tiras? Paras. The word Tzidei means Zutra, the youngster, the younger of the brothers. And as we learned above, the Tani Rabbi Yosef, Tiras refers to Paras. All right. Similarly, just like Rabbi taught, Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chanan Rabbi Yechanan in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Loi, that what? The same tradition, a futuristic event that Hasida Reimish, Tipul B'Yad Paras, that Rome, the Western world, right before Mashiach, will fall in the hands of the Persians. And how does he know that? He doesn't have a pasuk, but he has a Kal V'Chomer. Uma Migdash Rishon, first Beis HaMikdash, that was built by Bnei Shem, Semites. We are Semites. Shloim HaMelech. Yet Hichrivu Kasdim, the Kasdim, by the way, they were also Semites, but they were, today that's included or generally connected to the region of Bavel. So the Kasdim destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. And what did we see? That the Kasdim fell in the hands of the Persians. Because during the times of the first Galus between Bais Rishon and Bais Sheni, it began when Bavel was the superpower, and then it shifted to Persia. Oh, so Migdash Sheni. Now, why were the Parziim the ones that destroyed the Kasdim? Because when God wants to extract revenge against a nation, He uses a nation that are vengeful people. So the Parziim, so to say, they took God's revenge by overpowering the Kasdim, and they became the power of the world. So Migdash Sheni, that was built by the Parziim. And who destroyed them? The Romans. Is Einoidin Sheiflu Roimim B'Yad Parziim, because the Parziim won't only be extracting vengeance on behalf of God against Rome, but they are angry themselves. They don't know that, but their mazel understands that they're angry at Rome, that the Romans destroyed the temple that they built. So Atkan, two opinions. That what again? That in the future, asida roimi shetitol biyad paras. However, is also visin that Rav argues. Asida paras shetipol biyad roimi. The punkt fakir that right before Mashiach, paras will fall in the hands of roimi. I think this machlekes here was really the ruchnius dika machlekes in the last elections. Which one is going to win? Oh, and Omer Rav Kalan Ravasi to Rav, what you're saying doesn't make sense. Are you telling me that that Paras is going to fall, that Rome, that the Western world will win the battle against Persia? Doesn't make sense, because the Persians are the builders of the temple. The Romans are the ones, the Zaydis of the Western world is Rome, and they destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. So is it fair that Benoi Biyatza Soire, that the builders should fall in the hands of the destroyers? Not Vuz Yoishet. So Amar Lahu, Rav responds in, yes, that's what will happen. You have a logical question? I have no answer. You should know, Gzeiras HaMelachi. This is the decree of God Almighty, who is the king. Ikadamri, other people say that this is what Rav answered. That Rav says that why are you thinking that the Persians are the big tzaddikim, whereas Kevan, that the Persians are the ones that built the second Beis HaMikdash? Well, they did, but throughout, from then until now, Inu Nami HaKososri Beikanish, they are destroying Beis HaKnesses, they destroy shuls. So yeah, they built the Beis HaMikdash, they were not the ones that destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash, but throughout history, they did not act with any reverence, lehepech, towards the Mikdash Ma'at that the Jewish people had in the lands that were under their dominion. And indeed, says the Gemara, that don't forget that the Rebbe is the Chatana, that Tanya Nami Hachi, this is to back up Rav, that Asida Parash and Tipol B'Yad Roimi. And the Braisa says two reasons. Mamish, the way Rav answered, the two versions. Number one, even though they built the second Beis HaMikdash, but why will they fall at the end of days? Because the Sasri Beikanishta, because they destroyed many synagogues. And Va'oid, Gzeiras Melachum, that this is exactly what God decrees. That what? Sheyiplu Boinin B'Yatzvaisim, that the builders, which are the Persians, should fall in the hands of those who destroyed, which are the Romans. The Amar, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, this is again backing up, and this is Rav L'Shitosei, that the last kingdom, the last power, right before Mashiach, will be the Western world, will be Rome. Ein bein David ba achet tifshoit malchus reimi harasha b'chol ha'olam kuloi. And for how long will that be? About cook how long we are in Golus. So what was meant to be was 9 months. Tisha Chadash. Shenemer, as it says in Micha, that lochem yitnein ad eis yoyledo yolodom, that God will surrender the entire world until when it will give birth. Now, pregnancy is 9 months. But once the Mashiach will come, once there'll be the birth, then the Yeser Echav Yeshuvan al Bnei Yisrael. Then all of the other brothers of Yehuda that are not yet living in Eretz Yisrael, that's just going back to the beginning of the Sugya, then they will return and become part of the rest of the Bnei Yisrael. All right. Says the Gemara. We're coming back to Masechtas Yoma. So what did we learn? That the Kohen Gadol for 7 days lived in an area called Lishkas Parhedrin. Question is, was there a mezuzah placed as a mezuzah needs to be placed in a residence? Did it have a halachic status of a residence, thus obligated in a mezuzah? That call halishkois hoyev mikdash, all the chambers that we had in the holy temple, loy hoyel and mezuzah, there was no mezuzah there because it was not made for people to live. And by the way, just to know, we'll speak about this later. We had the sugi in Menaches that if a home now, a Beis HaKnesses, a shul that is used exclusively for davening, Taka also doesn't need to have a mezuzah. But coming back over here, says the Braisa chutz milishkas parhedrin. And let's learn pshat in the Braisa, in the sheet of the Tanakama, that the chamber of the Panhedrin was obligated biblically in having a mezuzah. Why? Because it is considered a residence. Why? True, the Kohen Gadol only moved in there 7 days a year. So what? Since for 7 days a year, this was where he lived, it has the status of a bias, not God's home, but a private home, and therefore it's mechuyev midoiraisa in a mezuzah. So holds the Tanach. However, Amar Rebbe Yehuda, you cannot be correct. Why? There were other chambers in the Beis Hamikdash, that also had a residence for different individuals, and he's speaking specifically about many guard rooms where the guards would sleep there at night, and then none of them were obligated to have a mezuzah. Now, Rabbi Yehuda is not debating the fact that there was a mezuzah in the Lishkas Parhedrin, but Rabbi Yehuda holds that the obligation of putting that mezuzah was not a biblical obligation because it was a home. There was a specific rabbinic reason why this chamber, the Parhedrin chamber, needs to have a mezuzah. And I'll already speak it out, as we'll have it soon, that one of the places that don't need a mezuzah is a prison cell, even though people live there, but dafke because people live there against their will, it's not mechuyev mezuzah. Truth be told, the Kohen Gadol was not given a choice. He was sequestered away from his residence, and as we learned above, away from his wife. People could have visited him, but he was also he was forced to move in there. For it not to look like a prison, which a prison is patur from mezuzah, they dafka put a mezuzah. Oh, and we'll see that more about that later. So in other words, no one is debating whether it had a mezuzah or not, but they are debating whether it was a biblical obligation or whether it was a rabbinic obligation. Says the Gemara, my Talmud Rabbi Yehuda. How do you explain that? Now, he had a proof from the other lishkos, but forget about his proof. A residence is mechuyev mezuzah. Chsaftam mezuzah is beisecha. Why was it not a bias? He taka lived there. So explains the Gemara, Amar Rabba, will go with the Girsa Rabba, Kosava Rebbe Yehuda, listen to this, that kol bias she'enei asuli moisachama vili moisagishamim, any residence that is not lived in the entire year doesn't mean that you can never leave for one day. It means that you live there summer and winter. To exclude a residence that's only used a certain time of year. Like if a person has a summer home and they only go there summer, that's what he's talking about. Here, he only went there for 1 week. It's not a residence for summer and winter, says Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rab, explaining Rabbi Yehuda, ain't a bias. It's not halachically called a house, and therefore, midoiraisa, it's exempt from mezuzah. Okay. Esvei Abaye, third line from the bottom. It says, regarding Pasuk and Amos, regarding a churban, that God says that He foresaw vehekesi as beis hachoyrev al beis hakayitz, that even the wealthy people, that they have a summer home and they have a winter home, that God will destroy both homes. The kashas from the fact that the pasuk refers to these homes as a bias, even though it's only a beis choyrev or only a beis kayitz, it's called a bias. Nachamaluch saftan al mezuzah is beis secha. Amalei, so which Rabbi responds, this verse not only is not a kasha on me, it's a proof to me. It's not called bias. It's called a beis choyrev. Has a shem levai. It's not called a bias. It's called a beis kayitz. Beis choyrev, a beis kayitz ikri. But bias stama, which is the word that Hashem uses regarding the obligation of putting a mezuzah, lo yikri. And therefore, again, that's just explaining Shitas Rebbe Yehuda, why midoiraisa, the Lishkas Parhedrin, which was only lived in for a week a year, was exempt from a mezuzah. Frek the Gemara, Esvei Abaye, to his teacher, to his stepfather. By Esvei Abaye, says in the Mishnah in Sukkah, it says in the Mishnah in Maiseres, I'm sorry, that Sukkahs hachag bechog, as we spoke out in the intro, when produce grows in the Holy Land, then there is an obligation to separate Trumas from Maiseres. From when is one obligated? Biblically, only from when the produce is a finished product. When is it a finished product? So one of the steps that's needed for produce that's not being sold wholesale from the fields, one of the steps that's needed, it's actually the last step that makes it considered it's finished, it's done, is when you bring it into the home. And the words that we have is it must see the face of the home. Actually, people that were looking to circumvent the biblical obligation of separating Trumas and Maasros, they would bring produce through the skylight. They would bring it in through a window. That was matter them. We're not saying that one should do that. That was a harama way of getting away from the obligation. So the question that the Mishnah and Maasros is discussing is if a person had produce and they brought it into the sukkah. Same question, bias. Is that considered re'iyas pnei habayis? Now, practical nafkamina would be that midrabanan, even before you are obligated to separate trumas and maasros, when it's in the field, you can't make a meal out of that food. But if you want to take a snack, you can snack. Or it's even midrabanan, before the iyas pnei habayis, achilas ara you can have. If a person today in Eretz Yisrael is in the field, and and they picked up a fruit out of the tree. They picked up an orange. They can make a bracha and eat it if it belongs to you. But once it's re'iyas pnei habayis midrabanan, you can't even have a snack from it. So there's a machlokas tanoim whether that is a machayev. So Rabbi Yehuda is machayev. You get the problem. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda holds that a sukkah is called a bayis b'negei maasros. The opposite of Rabbi Yehuda over here. That Rabbi is explaining that Rabbi Yehuda holds that if a house is not a house that's lived in the whole year, it's not called a bayis. That's a stira. The Chachamim are the ones that exempt. And V'tanei Allah, you should know in a Braisa that if I can look at this, that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't only apply his din regarding the din of Ma'aser. It's Benegeya, B'chayev, Be'eruv. So what did we learn in Masechtas Eruvin? That if there is a yard, there's a chatzir. Your home opens up into your chatzir. It's a Reshus HaYachid that belongs to the same person. Then I know that our other dinim regarding it has to be enclosed, but if it's properly enclosed, you can carry from your house into your backyard, no problem. What happens, my friends, if there's another person that has a house that opens up into the same yard? That is mechayiv and eruv chatzeres. It's now that there is one yard that is servicing, that belongs to, that is connected to two different batim. If the houses belong to different people, even though they're partners in the chatzir, that's the one of the takanas of Shleima HaMelech. You have to make an eruv chatzeres. So what happens if there is a house, you have a house, and the house goes into a yard, and my property adjacent to it, I built a sukkah, and one of the doors of the sukkah opens up to the chatzir. Is that mechayev the Baal HaSukkah and the other Baal HaBayis to make an eruv chatzeres? Says the Tana, yes, but that's only Rabbi Yehuda l'shitase. Because if the sukkah is not called a house, so what if a sukkah belonging to another party opens up to the yard? It's insignificant. No, Rabbi Yehuda considers a sukkah a house concerning the dinim of eruv. Clearly, mezuzah, shtei beferish. Rabbi Yehuda is mechayev you to put up a mezuzah on your sukkah because it's considered a bayis. And beneged the din that we just quoted in the Mishnah in Maasros, ube meiser, that produce that enters a sukkah is considered produce that had the iyas pnei habayis. Bottom line is gevalt. Rabbi Yehuda holds that you don't need to have a bayis that's lived in the whole year. Sukkah is called a chayv mezuzah. So why would Rabbi Yehuda say that the mezuzah that they had in the Lishkas Parhedrin was only gzeidas rabbanon? Like we said, it shouldn't look like a jail. No, faket, Rabbi Yehuda should have been the Tana that says you're chayv to put up a mezuzah. And the last line in the Amid. And don't tell me that this Baraisa that we quoted, that elaborates the Mishnah and Maasros, Benegei Eruv, Mezuzah, and Maaseh, is only midrabanan. That would have been a great answer. Hold on. Exactly. We just mentioned that Rabbi Yehuda says that the Lishkas Parhedrin did have a mezuzah midrabanan. The machlokes was, are you mechuyev midairaisa? Don't contradict it from Maasros. Maybe everything there is only midrabanan. Says the Gemara, no, it cannot be that way. And I'll tell you why. You would have been able to say that concerning the din of Eruv. Okay, then maybe Rabbi Yehuda only means that midrabanan. If there's a sukkah opening up to the chatzir, he's mechayiv making an eruv chatzeres. Maybe you could say mezuzah, midrabanan. But you know what, Meiser, you will not say so. The Chazal were very careful not to bring upon a rabbinic obligation to tithe because of a terrible takala that can come from it. Aval Meiser midrabanan can be. Why can it not be? Because a person. We follow rabbinic law. But if I'm going to have a pile of produce that has to be tithed midoiraisa, if the Chachamim would add other produce in that has to be tithed midrabanan, I might erroneously separate from one pile for the other. Now, B'chlal, you are allowed to separate one pile for the other if they are min hamukaf, if they are in physical close proximity. But there's a rule that if something is obligated to be tithed, and there's another pile that on the same level, midoraisa, is not obligated to be tithed, you may not separate trumas or maasros from one pile for the other. You understand? The chiyuv is not on the same level. Because so it's counterproductive as a rule for the chachamim to impose chiyuvim on something that midoraisa is not mechuyev in maasros. So if indeed Rabbi Yehuda would hold that a sukkah is only called a bayis midrabanan, he would not obligate one to tithe it because it entered the sukkah. So therefore, what must it be? We have to go back when we have a Mishnah and Maasros and the Braisa that elaborates explicitly regarding mezuzah. It must be that Shitas Rabbi Yehuda is that a sukkah is called a bayis biblically. Problem is, how can it be a bayis biblically if it's not used year around? And that is what we learned on Amud Aleph regarding Lishkas Panhedrin. So Rabba's response here is refuted. Ela Amar Abaye. I'll give you another understanding of the Braisa that we learned regarding was there a mezuzah or not on Lishkas Panhedrin. This is going back to the Braisa. Says the Abaye Beshiva during the 7 days that the Kohen Gadol actually lived there. Kulam olay pliga that you are chayiv. Gavaldik. During the 7 days that he lived there, it's considered a bias, and everyone holds that there is a biblical obligation to put up a mezuzah. This already answers the stira, including Rabbi Yehuda. And Taka, Rabbi Yehuda L'shitasi will say the same thing as Bayas Sukkah. During the week of Sukkah, you are biblically obligated to put up a mezuzah. So therefore, it's mechayev a eruv. Therefore, it's chayev a mezuzah midoraisa. Therefore, it's mechayev in a trumas u'maasros. There is a real b'riyas pnei habayis. But hold on, but there was a machlekes tanoim regarding the lishka. No, says Abba, you didn't understand pshat. Ki pligi was only b'shari moisa shana. Was that chamber obligated to have a mezuzah during the rest of the year? And you know what? even those who say yes, the Rabbanan that say yeah, that would not be midoraisa. Rabbanan savri that shari moisa shana, the lishka needs to have a mezuzah, and that is only a gezeira. Shari moisa shana atu shiva. In other words, if one would not have a mezuzah during the rest of the year, makes sense, practical, common sense. It's possible that when the Kohen Gadol will move in there 7 days before Yom Kippur, they will forget to put up a mezuzah. And since during those 7 days there's a chiyuv midoraisa, so the Chachamim say, here's a chaim, don't play shtick. Put up a mezuzah and leave it there. Gavaldik. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that this gezeda was not there. Rabbi Yehuda also holds of another gezeda. But just this concept that we're not afraid that if there is an environment that only needs a mezuzah midoraisa during a week in the year, we're not afraid that if you're not going to put it up for the rest of the year, you'll forget to put it. Why would we have that fear? A Yid knows you move into the house, if there is a chiyuv mezuzah, he'll bring a mezuzah. That is the way Abaye learns pshat in the Braisa. However, Rava will refute it. So Rava was refuted. Abaye now will be challenged. Amalei Rava, no. The Braisa speaks about, the Mishnah in Maasros. The Mishnah in Maasros, where Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim are arguing whether it's chayiv or pater b'mezuzah, and as we just beautifully proved that their debate is on a biblical level, sukas achag b'chag ketani. And yet, what did we learn? That only Rabbi Yehuda is mechayiv. The Chachamim are poitrim. So if the Rabbanan are poitrim, a sukkah from a mezuzah, so how can you say that they're mechayev midoraisa? Even now we have a problem, Rabbanan ad Rabbanan. And the only way to reconcile it, Ella Amar Rava, that b'shar yemois hashana kula alma loy pliga de petura. Everyone agrees that it's exempt. And we have to go back to understand that machlekes that we began regarding Lishkas Panhedrin was only regarding the 7 days. But now we pointed out a Gavaldik Estira. Not only do we have an issue between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda, but now we have a problem that if the Chachamim, which we're learning good pshat, is saying that midoraisa the Lishkas Panhedrin needs to have a mezuzah. You only live there during 7 days, so what? But during those 7 days it's a bias. Now we got a problem with the Rabbanan. So why do the Rabbanan exempt a sukkah from a mezuzah? No, it's not only do we have to now explain Rabbi Yehuda's Shita, we have to explain the Chachamim Shita that also appears to contradict itself. And therefore, says Rava, listen, my friends, Sukkah time Luchud and Lishka time Luchud. There are different principles at play. And he explains Sukkah time Luchud. We're focusing now on the latter din that Rabbi Yehuda Latime de Amar. When it comes to Sukkah, the question is, how do we classify a Sukkah? Rabbi Yehuda holds Sukkah must be classified as a diras kava. It must be viewed as a permanent residence. Of course, Rabbi Yehuda says you're only living there for the week of Sukkot. But during the week of Sukkot, it must be a permanent residence. Now, guys, what's the word? Just to remember that at the beginning of Sukkah, we had this question whether there is a maximum height of the Sukkah. That's the beginning. 20 amas and not taller. Chachamim, Rabbi Yehuda says taller. What is the underlying machlokes? If you build a wall that is higher than 20 amas, you have to make it thicker. You have to make it more permanent. And since the Chachamim hold that a sukkah dafka has to be of temporary nature, they give a limit to the height. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a sukkah has to be classified as a sukkah's keva. So therefore, the Rabbi Yehuda says, no, make it as tall as you want. Rabbi Yehuda holds sukkah diras keva ba'inan. Now what is mechayiv a home, a residence, a room, to have a mezuzah? Not the way we had, the way Rava says, it depends how many days in the year are you living in it. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with whether it's classified as a permanent dwelling. If you choose only to go into your summer home for the 2 months a year, doesn't matter, but it's a home. It's a permanent home. So a sukkah, Rabbi Yehuda, is a permanent home. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda holds your chayv and mezuzah. And therefore, as we mentioned, the chiyuv maisris is also biblical. Now, Eruv, obviously, the whole Eruv was only midrabanan, b'seder. But it's a chiyuv midayraisa. Rabban and l'tamayu, that they hold that sukkah must be classified as a diras arai, which is why they put a limit on the height of the sukkah. Because of it being considered and classified as a temporary dwelling, that's why loy mechayva b'mezuzah. And that explains the machloikas tanoim in the Mishnah and Maises. However, let's come back to the Baraisa that we had on the Fiura Madalif, and we're going to learn it the way we learned it originally, that they are having a machloikas, whether the lishka is obligated biblically in a mezuzah during the 7 days of the sequester. So here, there's a whole different principle, explains Rava, the lishka time alochod, which is, you are being forced to move in there. I know that the home is a permanent home. It's part of the Beis HaMikdash complex. But are you opting to move in there, or are you being obliged to move in there? The Kohen is being obliged. The Kohen Gadol has to move in there. That's why we use the word sequester. In Portuguese, sequester is used when you kidnap someone against your will. So the Rabbanan hold that even though it's during that week, it's a dira bal karcha, the Kohen Gadol is not. Guys, we're not saying that he's not excited to go in there, but he doesn't have an option. We can be excited about something, but you have to do it. He has to be there for 7 days. That Rabbanan hold that him being obligated to be in there does not halachically change the status of the residence. It's still called a dira.
Rabbi, is a sukkah not called bal karcha also?
We'll get to that in a minute.
You have to live there.
The Achronim speak about. I'll explain that in a moment. However, with Rabbi Yehuda Sava, Rabbi Yehuda holds, no, that dira, bal karcha loishma dira, which is mamish, the halacha of a jail. Now, umid rabbananu, so again, we had the Gzeres Rabbanan. It's not that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that there was no mezuzah. He just wants to make it clear that the chiyuv of mezuzah is only on a rabbinic level. Why? It should not give the appearance that he's been taken to jail. So let's just speak it out again. So when it comes to, it's a lack. If there would not have been a mezuzah, let's go with Rabbi Yehuda, it would have drawn attention to the fact that he's in there, so to say, as a enforced living. Gewaldig. Chachamim hold by Yesukah Yepater because it's temporary. The Lishka Sanhedrin is not called temporary Yechayiv. Rabbi Yehuda holds that Yechayiv in mezuzah in a sukkah because a sukkah is permanent. The structure of the Panhedrin is a taka permanent, but you are forced to be in there. So now the Bikash is Danny. What about a sukkah? So one of the basic approaches is like this. Koydem kol, we are allowed, even al pidin, to go in and out of the sukkah. Teishu ke'ein toduru, you can go in, you can go out. He was mamish in there for 7 days. And v'oid v'hua ikir, and that's the sugya that we had above, that his wife was not in with him. So if you are forced, this is obviously speaking about a good marriage. If you are forced to live in a certain location, as long as you can take your wife with you, that's not called forced. You're happy, your wife is with you.
Rabbi, what about a sukkah?
So in a sukkah, your wife goes with you. So it's not called forced. And in the Lishkas Parhedrin, he was taken.
I thought women don't normally sleep in the sukkah, according to the. For those that have the minhag to sleep in the sukkah, I thought their wives do not sleep in the sukkah.
Even if their wives do not sleep in the sukkah, but the wives can come into the sukkah. They're not being separated from their wives. They're not separated from their wives. It's amazing. Now, if a person has, God forbid, a temporary bad moment in the marriage, it would be the opposite. But here, the word, when are you in jail? But we're saying a person is in jail when he's not with his wife. That's beautiful. Who's asking a question?
What if the structure of the sukkah is permanent other than the roof?
So then, okay, that's a good topic. We're going to learn more about mezuzah tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Then, let me tell you, if a person uses that location during the year, then for sure they're obligated in a mezuzah. All the people that I know that have, in Brazil, I had a few people that they had, a structure in your house. You just lift up the roof. That room has a mezuzah. Let's hop another few lines. Now, says the Gemara, now that we have all this machlokes, so tell me now, based on the above, who is the author, who is the Tana that taught, Man Tana la the Tana Rabbanan, Daf Yud Aleph. What are we referring to? It says in a Braisa that Kol HaShiyarim Shehoyusham, all of the gates that was in the temple complex, there was never a mezuzah on it. Chutz mishad niknoid, and by the way, we're going to learn about shad niknoid in Yoma Lamed Ches, that when a person would enter the Lishkas Parhedrin, generally they would go through the Shad Niknar. And my friends, the rule is, we'll learn more details tomorrow about mezuzah, that a courtyard that opens up into a home, not only is the chiyuv on the mezuzah on the home, but that therefore extends and is machayev you to put up a mezuzah on the gate of the courtyard. So we view the Shad Niknar, Taka, you don't go from the Niknar into the Lishkas Parhedrin, as you can see here in the picture. But since the way you would go in there would be primarily by using Shad Niknoir, so therefore the obligation that lays on the Lishkas Parhedrin extends to the Shad Niknoir. So says the Gemara, now that we have the above, that it has to be the Rabbanan, and it cannot be Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because if that Braisa would have been learned by Rabbi Yehuda, what was the machlokes as we just established by Rava? That the machlokes is whether the Lishkas Parhedrin is mechuyev in mezuzah midoraisa or only midrabanan. And I know again, Rabbi Yehuda says there's a chiyuv midrabanan, but if the chiyuv of the Lishkas Parhedrin to begin with is only a gzeira midrabanan, it should not give the appearance of a jail. So he gufa gzeira. So va'anan neikoim v'nigzar gzeira l'gzeira. That is something that we won't say, and the Gemara says no. Maybe the author of the Braisa we just learned is Rabbi Yehuda, and maybe the mezuzah that they put on the gate of Niknar is only because it's a gateway that leads us into the Lishkas Parhedrin. The whole Lishkas Parhedrin to begin with only has a chiyuv midrabanan. So what? In other words, what's the goal of Rabbi Yehuda? You don't want for the Lishkas Parhedrin to give the appearance by it not having a mezuzah, that whoever's in there is forced to be in there. So you put up a mezuzah. Well, because it's a home. Well, if it's a home, then that's the rule. Then all of the shiurim that go into a courtyard, that go into a home, the shiurim also need to have a mezuzah. I just want to speak out now, and then we'll speak a lot more tomorrow about mezuzah. One question. Guys, remember when we asked the question, why doesn't the wife move in there? Right? So we learned that Rashi says, hold on, it must be that how can the wife should be in there, and then why can't they even have marital relations? Hold on, how can you have all of that in the Azara? So we learned to Rashi, it must be, Rashi says, that to begin with, Lishkas Parhedrin didn't have Kedushas Azara. Why not? Because if it would have had Lishkas Parhedrin, forget about the issue of how can a man be with his wife in there. You can't even sit down. The only people that can sit down in the area that's sanctified with Kedushas Azara are Malchis Beis David. But now what are we learning? We're learning that imagine that the Shad Nikman and Kavan put on the picture, Taka, that is where the Parhedron was, that you entered the Shad Nikman as to get to the courtyard which took you into the Lishkas Parhedron. So how is this not Mukdash with the Kedusha? Oh, that's a big question of the Azara. So whoever can see a picture will Taka notice that yes, you can enter the Lishkas Parhedron from the Azara, from Ezras Yisrael, which has Kedushas Azara. But as you can see, the Lishkas Parhedron also extended beyond the boundaries of the Azara. And we also learned, I think it was in Pesachim, that how do you classify when it comes to the tunnels? Remember, under Harabayas, it was in Pesachim, that many times the status, the Kedusha of a location has to do where the door is. From where do you enter it? What's their main opening? So a room that physically is on the area, within the area, or even partially within the area of the Azara, if it opens up the Harabayas, as does the Lishkas Parhedron, that you can enter it from the outside of the Azara, that gave it the status of only Harabayas and not the Azara, which is indeed why it was a living chambers, even though you also were able to enter to it through the Shad Niknar, which took you into Ezras Yisrael. A lot more, God willing, to be continued tomorrow.
So there's an entry from outside on the other side where you didn't have to come through Shar Niknar. That's what you're saying? And
that's why they were able to dafka not be Makadesh that Lishka. They were definitely not Makadesh it with Kedushas Hazara. The question is how did they even have such an option? I think that's the word, because it wasn't an exclusive entrance.
Thank you, Rabbi.